Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. UPSC CSE Mains 2024 GS Paper 2 has been concluded. We are here to present an analysis of the question paper. We'll start with polity, then Chethan sir would join and discuss questions related to international relations. Then Aastha ma'am would discuss questions related to social justice, and governance we will discuss separately. So let's focus on polity and let's look at question number 1. Examine the need for electoral reforms as suggested by various committees with particular reference to one nation, one election principle. Answer in 150 words, 10 marks. And you don't have to be a scientist to know why this question has appeared in the question paper. Why? Because it has been in the news because of Mr. Ram Nath Kovind committee, which was set up by the government, headed by the former President of India, to look into the entire gamut of one nation, one election. But look at the question. Examine the need for electoral reforms as suggested by various committees, then particular reference to one nation, one election principle. First, because the answer has to be in 150 words, simple definition of electoral reforms are needed to ensure free, fair, transparent and efficient elections, which will then increase and enhance the credibility of elections and also make elections, our democratic process, inclusive. But there have been various committees. On one hand, you can list down the names of the committees and what did they recommend, need. For example, Dinesh Goswami committee was set up to review the entire gamut of electoral reforms. It also suggested that there should be some form of state funding of elections. Indrajit Gupta committee was specifically set up to review the scope of state funding of Indian elections. Law Commission of India previously has recommended a lot of reforms, including one nation, one election. Vora committee, which was set up, it also recommended that we should do something to decriminalize our electoral system, to curb the use of money, muscle power, but with specific emphasis on nexus between criminals and elections and politics. Why? Because the question is saying examine the need for electoral reforms. What are electoral reforms? Various committees have suggested ways of dealing with the issues surrounding Indian elections. For example, to curb the menace of criminals and politics, bracket, Vora committee, go for, let's say, electoral reforms in terms of state funding of elections. We have Indrajit Gupta committee, we have Dinesh Goswami committee, Law Commission recommending how can we purify electoral rolls in India. But then with particular reference to one nation, one election. But the question is asking you the need. And what is the need for one nation, one election? To restrict the use of model code of conduct. And I don't have to explain this because it seems that we are in a continuous cycle of elections. Elections to Lok Sabha got over, and now we have elections in Jammu and Kashmir, Haryana, then we will have elections in Maharashtra, Jharkhand, then elections in Delhi, then 5 other states. It seems as if we are in a continuous cycle of elections. And if model code of conduct is implemented each time in these states, it will affect governance. So to improve governance, restrict the use of model code of conduct, that is the need for one nation, one election. Also to curb the expenditure, to prevent fatigue to our paramilitary troops. who are in a continuous cycle of election duty. Also, this one nation, one election is required to minimize the caste and communal conflicts that are unfortunately a regular feature in the elections. All these are the needs for which we need one nation, one election. But maybe towards the end, you can also write that this demand for one nation, one election, or this principle of one nation, one election, critics argue would undermine the independence of the regional political parties, would affect federalism. So without proper consultation and consensus being arrived at, this idea of one nation, one election should not be implemented. Question number 1, 150 words. The answer is over. Clear? Let's look at another question. Explain and then distinguish between Lok Adalats and arbitration tribunals. So what you have to explain? Lok Adalats, arbitration tribunals, distinguish them, whether they can entertain civil as well as criminal cases. Lok Adalats have been given legal sanctity because of the Legal Services Authorities Act, and Lok Adalats are set. You don't have to explain what is the composition of the Lok Adalat. You just have to contrast, explain these two institutions of Lok Adalat and Arbitration Tribunal, and then say whether they are entertaining civil as well as criminal cases. Let's look at it. Lok Adalats, these are basically informal courts created under the Legal Services Authorities Act 1986-87. What is their aim? To resolve disputes through conciliation, that means through mutual agreement. They can handle civil cases, for example, family disputes, land issues, also motor vehicle insurance claims. Can these Lok Adalats take up criminal cases? There is one criminal case that they can take up, which is basically a compoundable offence. That is called a check bounce case. Decisions are binding only if both the parties agree. No appeal can be made against the decision because now the matter has been settled by the Lok Adalat. But when we look at the arbitration tribunals, they are formal forums established under Arbitration and Conciliation Act. They handle civil disputes, for example, commercial disputes, contract disputes. These decisions are called awards, and that is what distinguishes it from the Lok Adalat. And they are binding and cannot be challenged in court, can be challenged in court, but only under specific circumstances. And we don't need to elaborate on them. Why? Because the word limit is 150. But they do not handle criminal cases. Key differences: Lok Adalats handle both civil and compoundable criminal offences, where arbitration tribunals, they deal only with civil disputes involving contracts, involving commercial disputes. Lok Adalats are informal, based on mutual agreement, whereas arbitration tribunals are formal and involve more structured process. That's how the answer should be written. Let's look at question number 3. The growth of cabinet system has practically resulted in the marginalisation of parliamentary supremacy. And when I was looking at this question, I thought I will add the screenshot as well, one of the Concord main sessions that I had taken, but then I deleted it. There I had specifically mentioned the arguments given by constitutional expert Mr. Arvind Datar. I had mentioned a book called New Despotism. What is the context of this question? Because over the past few years, or at least over the past 10 years, we have seen that Parliament as an institution is being run by the executive. Executive in the sense, ideally in a parliamentary democracy, Parliament should exercise control over the executive. But since the governments have had brute majority, it is the executive which controls the Parliament. So the growth of cabinet system has practically resulted in the marginalization of parliamentary supremacy. Elucidate. What you can incorporate in this answer is frequent resorting to the ordinance route. And whenever you pass an ordinance under Article 123, you're basically bypassing the Parliament. Similarly, pre-legislative consultation policy, which started in 2014. The idea was that all the important bills, before being passed by the Parliament, presented to the Parliament, they should be discussed by the committees. Some of these bills which involve public opinion should be sought, so you should send this bill for public opinion and then incorporate the reports of the public opinion and then discuss this bill. So there should be thorough debate, discussion on a particular bill before they are being legislated, pre-legislative consultation policy. This also has not happened over the past 10 years. What you can also write is about Business Advisory Committee. Headed by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, and it is dominated by the members of the ruling party. Why? Because they have the majority in the Parliament and they get to decide what are the bills to be taken up for discussion, how much time should be allocated for a particular bill. So the very dominance of the members of the ruling party in Business Advisory Committee, ultimately what happens? It leads to marginalisation of the parliamentary supremacy. Similarly, anti-defection law as well. Where a member of a political party belonging to a house is bound by the whip issued by the political party. So ideally inside the Parliament, you should have an independent voice. But this whip directed by the political party, you can't take an independent decision on supporting or withdrawing support to a particular bill, which ultimately undermines Parliament's supremacy. Similarly, some of the points that we have mentioned here, parliamentary calendar. Parliament does not meet often. And who can summon the Parliament? That's the government. President on the advice of the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. So all these point to a vision where Parliament has been undermined in its supremacy, because with the growth of the cabinet system, where the government which enjoys the brute majority on the floor of the Parliament, they get to control the Parliament and not vice versa. You can also cite some of the statistics if possible, because again the limit is 150 words, where the bills have been passed in the Parliament over the past few years in less than 7 minutes. So majority of these bills, more than 70% of the bills, have not been referred to standing committees for proper discussion, because in standing committees, even if you are members of various political parties, but you take an independent stance in these standing committees, and ultimately there is a good, thorough debate, dissection happening on a particular bill. This also has not happened over the past 10 years. Although you should not mention over the past 10 years, the practice over the past few years has been like this, which has eroded the parliamentary supremacy. Clear? Let me look at some of the comments. Okay, great. The duty of the CAG is not merely to ensure the legality of expenditure, but also its propriety. That means you are following set procedures, norms. Answer in 150 words, 10 marks. So focus on 1050 words. Why this question has been asked? Because CAG recently, over the past couple of years, has flagged some concerns, whether it is in Ayushman Bharat or whether it is in the Bharat Mala project. The CAG has flagged concerns. But what is the question? The duty of CAG is not merely to ensure legality of expenditure, but also its propriety. CAG, although it's a constitutional body, but its conditions of service, its terms are governed by the CAG Act of 1971. And this law elaborates on the scope of the CAG's authority. But the interpretation of this law, according to Arvind Gupta judgment of 2012, the Supreme Court said that CAG does not only have the power or duty to see whether the actions of the government, because you have to audit the accounts of the government, the way they spend the money, the expenditure. CAG's power, CAG has been empowered to not only audit the legality of transaction, but also to examine its propriety, which means whether the expenditure is reasonable, appropriate, and whether it serves the intended purpose. And that is why some people sometimes call it also as the performance audit. That means we should not only look at, CAG should not only look at whether if 1 crore rupee was earmarked for flying, but exactly what did we achieve by flying, or what did we achieve by printing, what did we achieve by buying the stationery. So basically you have to conduct something called the performance audit. Recent instances, Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, providing treatment for patients who had already been declared dead, as well as for thousands of people using the same Aadhaar number or invalid phone number. What is this? This is basically the propriety earmarked by the comptroller and the auditor general, because you don't have to only look at the legality of transaction. You have to look at whether this money was spent for the intended purpose or not. Propriety has to be shown. And that is why recent instances, you can say, which justify that the duty of the CAG is not only to ensure legality, but also its propriety, is in the recent reports of the CAG. For example, this report on Ayushman Bharat, or the report on Bharatmala project. Look at the statement. CAG noted that existing incomplete projects of the National Highway Development Project were taken up under Bharatmala without resolving the existing bottlenecks, which means highway along the Bihar and Jharkhand border was to be completed by November 21, but as of March 2023, only 62% of the project was completed. This is the propriety audit. CAG observed several instances where implementing agencies selected ineligible bidders who did not fulfill tender conditions or who gave false documents to say that we are eligible for this tender. This also has been flagged by the CAG reports, which are ultimately presented to the president, and then the president will lay these reports on the floor of the parliament, which means CAG is not only there to ensure that expenditure is legalized or that the money has been spent in a legal manner, but also ensure its propriety. 150 words, 10 marks, the answer is over. What are the main aims and objects of recently passed and enforced Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Act, where the University State Education Board examinations too are covered under the Act? And this we have covered in the Hindu newspaper analysis as well, in UCAN sessions as well. What is the law passed in response to the paper leak which we witnessed, NEET and others? First thing that you have to note is what are the aims and objects of this law, and then you have to answer whether University or State Education Board examinations too are covered under this Act. And then you will have to write something else as well, which I will say. What are the aims and objects? People should not get unauthorized access to the question paper. Question paper should not be leaked. Answer key should not be given some unauthorized access. That means those who are not authorized to view the answer key, they should not be allowed to, or paper. That is the aim and object of this law. Assisting a candidate during a public examination should be criminalized, should be prohibited. That is another objective of this. That means someone else should not be there to ensure that a candidate is cheating in the exam. Tampering with the computer network or resources. For example, there are examinations conducted online as well, and such online examinations depend heavily on the computer networks. So if you tamper with the computer networks, hacking for example, although not specifically used in this law, that is also an offense, and that is the objective of this law, to curb this. Similarly, this law also imposes a restriction on service providers. That means those who are in charge of conducting this examination, because there are some examinations which are being outsourced to companies to carry out these examinations. Then there is an additional responsibility on them. Fixing their responsibility, that is another aim and objective of this law. Organized crime has been taken care of, because in an organized manner there are people who are trying to get access to the question paper. There are people who are trying to get access to the answer key. There are people who are trying to assist others in getting the examination cleared. All these are the aims and objective of this law. But does this law cover also the state board examinations or university exam? Unfair means in public examinations is the focus of this act. Now, what do we mean by public examination? That means examination conducted by the authorities. Which are these authorities? Which will be mentioned in the schedule to this act or will be notified by the central government. Which are these exams? Exams conducted by UPSC, Staff Selection Commission, RRB, National Testing Agency, IBPS, departments of the central government and their offices. So which clearly means that state government or a university, which is a state university, does not come under these examinations. Clear? So for that there is a separate law required. Despite this fact, we see that's something you'll have to mention towards the end. Majority of the paper leak and unfair means in the examination happens in the examinations conducted at the state level. So there is a need, just like UP passed a law to curb the menace of paper leak, there is a similar need to enact such laws by the respective state legislatures. That brings you to the end of this question. Clear? Right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty and is inherently protected under Article 21 of the Constitution. Explain. In this reference, discuss the law relating to DNA testing of a child in the womb to establish its paternity. Now, why this question has been asked? Because a lot of debate happened on this, not recently, but somewhere in 2022, somewhere in 2021 as well. How? Right to privacy. Mention the K.S. Puttoswamy judgment. Where a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court ruled that right to privacy is an integral part of Article 21, which deals with right to life and personal liberty. The Supreme Court, using its judicial creativity, expanded the scope of Article 21 by interpreting dignity of an individual as mentioned in the preamble of the Constitution. Because how did one of the ways by which Supreme Court came with this conclusion that right to privacy is indeed an integral part of Article 21 is by looking at the preamble of the Constitution. And in preamble, one of the objective is dignity of an individual. 9 judges of the Supreme Court, because this decision of the court was taken by the majority of 9:0. 9 judges of the Supreme Court said that this dignity of an individual is not possible unless and until citizens have right to privacy. So right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty and is inherently protected under Article 21 of the Constitution. And now explicitly provided by a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court. Not just inherently, but explicitly also provided by a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court in K.S. Puttoswamy case 2017. In this reference, discuss the law relating to DNA testing of a child in the womb of the mother to establish its paternity. For that, you'll have to cite certain judgments. Which law allows DNA testing in India? Indian Evidence Act, which has now been replaced by another code in India. That is the law which provided for DNA testing. But something has happened in 2022, 2021. But before that, this issue was raised in Babani Prasad Jena versus Odisha, where the Supreme Court said, yes, DNA tests are very important, very powerful tools through which we can test whether this person is the father of this child or not. But even this test should not infringe upon the personal rights. That means without the consent of the woman, you cannot order the DNA test. So what will prevail? If you have to establish truth in terms of who is the father, but at the same time you have to uphold the privacy of this woman, without her consent, you should not allow for DNA testing. And remember, this decision of the court precedes the right to privacy judgment. Even before right to privacy judgment, the privacy was held sacrosanct by the court. Supreme Court in 2022, in a case concerning a woman, because you can't reveal the identity of this woman, that is why she was known only as XX, to protect her identity. The Supreme Court said, compelling an unwilling person to undergo DNA test would be violation of his or her personal liberty and right to privacy. So what this judgment did, it put a spotlight on technology and privacy. Because on one hand, this technology, which is basically DNA testing, this technology can be used for justice. But at the same time, it might violate privacy of another individual. That is why the courts have said DNA test should not be ordered if there are other material evidence in before to prove the case. So if there is another way, another evidence which is presented to the court, except the DNA, disregarding the DNA, separating the DNA, if there is another evidence or another set of evidence presented before the court, which can help us reach the conclusion, reach to the truth, then those evidences should be taken into account. You should not resort to DNA testing. In Ashok Kumar judgment 2021, the court said judges, before ordering such a test, should examine proportionality of legitimate aims being pursued. What are you trying to pursue? Is it because in one case, a man ordered a DNA testing on the fetus inside the womb because he wanted to test whether the partner I'm associated with, whether she is cheating on him. So legitimate aim should be established. If it is a property dispute, if you have to look at who is the legitimate heir of this property, then that's a legitimate aim. But just to find out whether the partner is cheating on you or not, whether the child in the womb is mine or not, you should not be resorting to the DNA testing. But not just this, you have to sometimes go beyond what the question is asking. Sometimes, if it is relevant to the question. Right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty and is inherently protected under Article 21 of the Constitution. Explain. In this reference, discuss the law relating to DNA testing of a child in the womb to establish its paternity. That is why for DNA testing, DNA issues, there was a bill, DNA Technology Use and Application Regulation Bill of 2019, which ultimately was withdrawn by the government. So in this case, since Indian Evidence Act speaks about the DNA testing in case to check the paternity suits, to check the who is the parent in this case, for that we need to look at beyond it by reconsidering this DNA technology bill. Clear? What changes has the union government recently introduced in the domain of center-state relations? Suggest measures to be adopted to build the trust between the center and states and for strengthening federalism. Now I can imagine that when some of you would have read this question, you would have been confused. What are the recent changes that the union government has introduced in the domain of center-state relations? What are these recent changes which have been included? So your mind would only talk about, is there something positive which has happened? But you should also look at, is there something negative which has happened? Or it may not necessarily be in the domain of laws being enacted, maybe in policies. And what is this meaning of this term recently? Recently, does that mean in the last 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? It can be recently, can be over the past couple of years. And over the past couple of years, what are the changes that union government has introduced in relation to center state? What are these changes? One nation, one ration card. All the states were asked that you have to compulsorily implement one nation, one ration card, I think by January 31, 2022 or 2021, either 21 or 22. Under this, if there is a migrant, because if you are eligible under National Food Security Act as a beneficiary, you can get subsidized food grains at a fair price shop within that state. But what if there is a migrant who is migrating from Bihar to Karnataka? He should have access to a one nation, one ration card so that although he is eligible in Bihar, but even at a fair price shop in Karnataka, he can get the subsidized food grains. There are many state governments, West Bengal for example, which said that we will not implement one nation, one ration card. So whenever you think of terms like one nation, one ration card, there are arguments in favor, but there are arguments against because federalism somehow it's getting diluted. So this is one nation, one ration card which was introduced. Pradhan Mantri Shri, PM Shri schools. And look at the conflict between Tamil Nadu government and the central government. Central government has withheld some of the money, some of the funds that should have been made allocated to Tamil Nadu, close to 573 crore, if I'm correct, if I can recall correctly. Why? Because it was withheld. Tamil Nadu government says, because we were told that we have to sign a memorandum of understanding to ensure that we implement PM Shri. And the idea of PM Shri is to create 14,500 model schools in different parts of the country. And new National Education Policy 2020, where there is a controversy on 3-language formula. Then there is a suit filed by the Kerala government before the Supreme Court under Article 131. Because Kerala is under financial stress, they wanted to borrow additionally, they wanted to raise more money through loans, but there is a limit imposed by the Finance Ministry on the states borrowing additional funds. That matter has now gone to the Supreme Court. That's the recent change. Recent change can also be, if recent is a subjective word, it can be the amendments which were made to National Investigation Agency Act, which gave more powers to the Director General of the NIA than the Director General of the Police when it comes to investigating cases related to terrorism, narcotics, so on and so forth, which undermines, allegedly, according to states, the role of the police. And in the distribution of powers, police is under state list. So what changes has the union government recently introduced in the domain of center-state relations? This can be one part of your answer. Suggest measures to be adopted to build the trust between the center and the states and for strengthening federalism. Implement the Sarkaria Commission report. Implement Punchi Commission report. Related to governors, because unless and until you cite the example of governor, because governors and the chief ministers of Telangana, of Tamil Nadu, of Kerala, of Punjab, of West Bengal have been in constant conflict with each other. The matter has sometimes reached the Supreme Court as well, for example, in case of Punjab, for example, in Tamil Nadu's case. So you have to look at the office of governor. So suggest measures to be adopted to build trust between the center and the states for strengthening federalism and for strengthening federalism. Sarkaria Commission, Punchi Commission report related to the office of the governor. Not just this. Can I add another slide here? No. Zonal councils. The meetings of the zonal councils, the agenda to be discussed in these zonal councils is decided by the central government. Zonal councils should be modified so that states can also propose the agenda to be decided and discussed in these zonal council meetings. Similarly, we have interstate council, which is meant to look at what? If the president is satisfied that some of the disputes, some of the concerns between center and the states can be resolved by setting up an interstate council. The president has set up interstate council, but there have been demands that this interstate council, instead of discussing the problems related to center and the state, should adjudicate problems and adjudicate the problems between the center and the state. That's another thing that can strengthen federalism and then that can bring or build the trust between the center and the states. These are some of the suggestions that we can incorporate. Even the Second Administrative Reforms Commission recommendations, even various other committee reports we can use to supplement this answer. Clear? Let's look at another question. Explain the reasons for the growth of public interest litigation in India. As a result of it, has the Indian Supreme Court emerged as the world's most powerful judiciary? Now, this is an extreme statement. As a result of this, has the Indian Supreme Court emerged as the world's most powerful judiciary? Explain the growth of the public interest litigation in India. What are these reasons? Reason number one is bona fide work taken by non-governmental organizations. In good faith, there are non-governmental organizations which file petitions before the Supreme Court. That's what we call public interest litigation. For example, Association for Democratic Reforms, People's Union for Civil Liberties, People's Union for Democratic Rights, Common Cause. That's reason number one. Reason number two is judicial literacy. Judicial literacy has also enhanced since 1970s, which means people are more aware of their rights and ultimately they are more likely to approach the court. What are the reasons for the growth of public interest litigation in India? Trust in the judiciary. People trust judiciary as an impartial, unbiased institution which is capable of granting justice to the people. That is the reason for the growth. Dilution of locus standi. Previously, you could have approached the court only if you were one of the aggrieved individuals, if your rights had been snatched. But now any public-spirited individual can approach the court and file this petition of public interest litigation without having to prove that you are somehow related to this case, related to this dispute. So this dilution of locus standi has also resulted in the growth of public interest litigation in India. Also, ready acceptance and success stories. Supreme Court is readily accepting these public interest litigations, and some of these public interest litigations have been successful as well. So the success stories coming from these public interest litigations have further precipitated the rise in the number of PILs being filed. And let's not forget that it is because of these PILs which have enhanced or which have elaborated the scope of fundamental rights in India. Most of the inferred rights and these inferred rights under Article 19(1)(a), inferred rights under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution has been made possible because of public interest litigation. For example, the recent public interest litigation, although it was pending for a long time, but the judgment came, where Association for Democratic Reforms approached the court challenging the constitutional validity of electoral bonds. Supreme Court said right to know the funding of the political party is also under right to know, which is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a). Similarly, under Article 14 and Article 21 in N.K. Ranjit Singh case, Supreme Court said right against adverse effects of climate change is also a fundamental right under Article 14 and Article 21. And because of these reasons, Supreme Court has emerged as one of the powerful institutions in India. Although it is debatable, although it can be argued whether the Supreme Court of India is the world's most powerful judiciary or not, but it clearly is India's most powerful institution in the way it has delivered justice. By deciding on PILs, by invoking Article 142 of the Constitution, it clearly has emerged as a powerful institution in India. Clear? Maybe you can also somehow relate it to Roe v. Wade. What happened in the United States? A historic judgment was given by the US Supreme Court in 1973, which implemented the trimester system in pregnancies and gave right to abortion as a federal right to all the women in the United States. And then Donald Trump, when he was the president of the United States, he added conservative judges to the US Supreme Court, and ultimately the US Supreme Court overturned this Roe v. Wade protection. Now, individual states will have the power to decide whether abortion is legal within our state or not. So a right to abortion is not a federal right now in case of United States. So such dilution of historic landmark judgments by planting judges favorable to the ideology of the president, something of that sort we have not witnessed in India, which means Indian judiciary has been viewed not just as powerful institution, but also an independent institution. Clear? Any questions as of now? Okay. Discuss India as a secular state and compare with the secular principles of the US Constitution. Although the term secular was added to the Indian preamble by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, following provisions of Indian Constitution clearly spelled out a secular nature of Indian state. Article 14, right to equality. Article 15, non-discrimination on the grounds of religion. Article 16, non-discrimination on the grounds of religion when it comes to matters of public employment. Article 25, which gives fundamental right to profess, practice and propagate your religion. Article 27, which implicitly lays down the secular identity of India, wherein we say that the taxes cannot be used for the promotion of any one particular religion. Taxes, the proceeds of the taxes cannot be used for the protection or promotion of any one particular religion. That's the secular state, India. And it is remarkable considering the other countries in our neighborhood has fallen into theocracies. Comparison with the secular principles of US Constitution. US Constitution's First Amendment also talks about clearly separation of religion from state. But there is some difference. When it comes to India, or United States for that matter, in India, state is secular. That means no religion can be upheld as the state religion. Same goes with United States, where religion cannot be a state religion in United States. In India, state can interfere. In terms of your religious practices. Religious reform is an integral part of Article 25, where Constitution says throwing up of Hindu religious temples and structures is part of the social reform. But in United States, whatever you want to do within the four walls of your home, that is your fundamental right, unless and until you affect public order, the state will not interfere. The very purpose of United States secular identity is they just want to separate state from church. That church should not be in a position to dictate the policies of the state when it comes to family, when it comes to education, whether it comes to foreign policy, whether it comes to economy. That's not the job of the church. Church and state are separate in their own areas of influence. But in India, the state can regulate temples. The state can regulate religious properties. The state can take over the management of even the religious properties. So state and religion, although they are separate, no religion can be proclaimed as the state religion in India, but there is still a lot of harmony and lot of interference by the state in religious matters. Not just by the state, but by the court as well. This is how you can relate it to the principle of doctrine of essentiality, where the Supreme Court ruled in way back in 1954 that all those principles which are essential to a religion will be protected. Otherwise, we can regulate those practices which are not an integral part of the religion. This is how you can relate it to the hijab controversy as well. And that is how in India, the court has the power to define the essential religious practices of a particular religion. But that is something that can't happen in United States. Because whatever your religion is, practice it within the four walls of your home. You can practice it in the open as well, unless and until you violate public order. Clear? These were the 9 set of questions that we had to discuss for Indian polity. After this, Chethan sir would come and discuss questions related to international relations. Then Aastha ma'am would discuss questions related to social justice. And then we'll have a separate discussion on governance. And if you have enjoyed this discussion, then don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. We'll take a pause, 1 minute pause. Chethan sir will join and then discuss international relations. Thank you.
Hello dear students, welcome to Unacademy IAS English. Welcome to the paper discussion and analysis of GS paper 2 which was conducted today evening. So Sarmad Sir has just finished the discussion of the polity questions and now we'll get started with the questions from international relations. We had 4 questions from IR, which is the usual trend, amounting to 50 marks. And the best part was at least 3 questions were very easily answerable. And there was one question which was from current affairs from 2 years ago. So that shows that UPSC can surprise the aspirants by asking slightly older current affairs based questions as well. So let's take a look at these questions, analyze them and see how you can write good answers. Let's start with question number 9. The West is fostering India as an alternative to reduce dependency on China's supply chain and as a strategic ally to counter China's political and economic dominance. Explain. So this was a very anticipated topic. Over the last couple of years, China's dominating control over the global supply chain has been in the news. In fact, ever since the pandemic and the disruption caused by the pandemic, countries have realized that if they depend heavily on China and China-dominated supply chains, this could adversely affect their economy. And given China's aggressiveness in its diplomacy and how China leverages economic advantages for geopolitical gains, countries started fearing a geopolitical threat and even a security threat, as they depended on China. So it's in this context that this question has been asked. So let's see how you can build a good answer to this. How Western countries have been trying to foster India, trying to cultivate India as an alternative to China to reduce their dependency on the China-dominated supply chains. And how Western powers look at India as a strategic ally to counter China politically and economically. So that is the focus of the question. So you need to write a very crisp and precise answer because it's a 10-mark question for 150 words. But before we discuss the answer, I would like to point out that I had covered this topic comprehensively in our Conquer Mains sessions and as well as in our plus classes. For example, in the second IR session of Conquer Mains, I had specifically addressed the supply chain issue. How China has dominated global supply chains through its manufacturing strength and how countries have become import dependent on China and how this could be a disadvantage. In the plus classes under India-US relations, we had discussed how United States looks at India as a counterweight to China, to counterbalance China politically and economically. So in Conquer Mains, I also gave an example because the question, if you read the question carefully, it's asking you to list some examples to show how Western countries are focusing on India, trying to foster India as an alternative to China, to ensure that they diversify the global supply chains. So you need to be aware of some examples, some initiatives, and this is something I've covered comprehensively in the classes. We spoke about Mineral Security Partnership, which is led by United States. India recently became a member of the Mineral Security Partnership. We had discussed I2U2 initiative in the plus classes, which brings India, US together along with other like-minded allies like Israel and United Arab Emirates, through which they are trying to diversify the global economic supply chain. We also discussed the India-Australia-Japan Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, which again shows how Western powers like Australia, Japan also are trying to foster India, work with India to build alternate supply chains. Because see, this question is focused on Western countries trying to nurture India as an alternative to China. It's not specific to United States. So you need to look at initiatives with maybe Australia, Japan and European countries as well, try to give them as examples. You can even talk about India-Australia Critical Mineral Partnership, which I had discussed in the plus classes. We had spoken about Australia being a reliable source of critical and strategic minerals and how India can be part of the supply chain to diversify the supply of critical strategic minerals. So this can be added as an example. And of course, under Conquer Mains, we discussed how United States and India are working together to counter China, as US perceives China as a threat and India is a like-minded partner. I had given some examples and instances to highlight how India, US are working together to jointly counter and contain China's rise and its aggression. We spoke about initiatives like the quadrilateral, how India, US with Japan and Australia are trying to enforce the rules-based order. So such examples can be used in this answer. So let's see how we can build a crisp answer within the 150 word limit. So if you understand the question clearly, there are two parts to this question. One is about supply chains, how China dominates the global supply chains and how Western countries are trying to find an alternative with India. The second part of the question is on how Western countries look at India as a strategic ally to counter China politically and economically. So you can begin your answer with a good introduction, talking about China's dominant control over global supply chains. You can give the example of the COVID-19 pandemic, how the pandemic and the lockdowns led to a disruption of global supply chains affecting almost every other economy. India and Western countries especially, which had an import dependency on China, were severely affected. So in a couple of lines, you can bring out in the introduction itself how countries have become heavily dependent on China-dominated supply chains. You can even mention how China leverages its economic advantage to gain geopolitical advantages. So in one small paragraph, in just 2 to 3 lines, you can open your answer by talking about China's dominant control on supply chains, how other countries are dependent on China, and how China leverages its economic strength to gain geopolitical advantages. In the body, you can talk about how Western countries are looking at India as an alternative to China, how they are working with India to diversify the supply chains, and you can start giving the examples. The Mineral Security Partnership led by United States, you can mention I2U2, you can mention India-Australia Critical Mineral Partnership, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative between India, Australia and Japan. Similarly with European powers as well, with the West European powers especially, France, Germany, Italy and UK. India is working closely with them to diversify the global supply chains. So again, in one paragraph, you can explain how India is being pushed as an alternative to China to reduce the dependency of other countries on China-dominated supply chains. In the second part of your body, talk about China's aggressive rise, how it poses political and economic threats for several countries, especially the Western powers. You can briefly mention China's expansionist behavior in the South China Sea, how it is trying to dominate the Indo-Pacific region, and how it is trying to dominate the global economy as well. So once you set the context, you can point out that Western powers are looking at India as a counterweight. United States, Australia, Japan, European countries, they're all building strategic partnerships with India. They have built close defense and strategic relations with India, and they look at India as a democratic rising power in Asia, which can be the perfect counter to a communist authoritarian China. So present this assessment, then you can conclude the answer by presenting a way forward. So in hardly around 140 to 150 words, you should be able to summarize this, and that should complete your answer. Now let's look at the next question. Question number 10, a very easy question on Central Asia region and India's relations with Central Asia. The question read, critically analyze India's evolving diplomatic, economic and strategic relations with Central Asian republics, highlighting their increasing significance in regional and global geopolitics. This was a much anticipated question because Central Asia has been playing a pivotal role in India's foreign policy. In fact, India and Central Asia have gotten closer to each other in the last couple of years. So in 2022, the first ever India-Central Asia Summit had been organized. So again, this question, if you look at the reason why UPSC has picked it, it's based on current affairs of almost 2 years ago. Of course, Central Asia has remained in news. It remains a priority for India. But the last big development in India-Central Asia relations was 2 years ago, and UPSC chose to pick a question on this. We had covered this topic as well extensively in our plus classes. Under India-Central Asia chapter, I had discussed the landlocked nature of Central Asia while talking about its geography and strategic location. I had discussed how Central Asia is landlocked with limited access to the global economy. And we even discussed how Central Asia is blessed with resources. It has precious minerals, it has even rare earth elements, critical minerals, uranium, etc., which is a perfect opportunity for India. India enjoys traditionally good ties with this region, especially after the dissolution of Soviet Union. India has been very close to all the Central Asian countries, all the 5 Central Asian republics. So we had discussed in class the priorities and concerns that India has. Since the region is landlocked, one major challenge for India is the lack of connectivity. We don't have direct connectivity with Central Asia, so pursuing connectivity projects to reach Central Asia has been a priority in our Connect Central Asia policy. This is something you need to keep in mind when you're writing an answer to this question. Under the Connect Central Asia policy, establishing connectivity with Central Asia is a priority so we can tap the resources. And the question is also focusing on the regional geopolitical competition and the global competition which is underway in Central Asia. Right? You can refer to the great game which is underway in Central Asia, where global powers and regional powers are competing for influence as they all want to take a share of these resources. And also, I had explained in class how Central Asian countries can play an important role in regional diplomacy, especially in countries like Afghanistan. Central Asian powers, along with India, can help stabilize the political security situation in Afghanistan. So across the region, from Central Asia to South Asia to West Asia, these Central Asian republics can have a positive influence with India to stabilize the region and build strong economic and strategic relations. So based on this understanding and based on the recent developments in India-Central Asia relations, including the first ever India-Central Asia summit and the progress seen at the summit, you can use these points to write a good answer for this question. To substantiate your answer, you can use the examples of the connectivity projects that we are pursuing. You can talk about Chabahar Port project, the INSTC project, how it can be used to link with Central Asia. India becoming a member of Ashgabat Agreement that allows India to connect with Central Asia and West Asia. You can talk about the regional groupings of Central Asia, Eurasia region, especially the SCO, how it is focused on Central Asian republics, and India being a member of SCO provides us the right opportunity to work with these countries. So these are some pointers you need to keep in mind when you try to write an answer to this question. So what you can do is, in the introduction, you can discuss the location, essentially the strategic location, the geography of Central Asia. You can point out that Central Asia is landlocked but blessed with immense resources. So you can also mention that for India, the biggest challenge here would be lack of connectivity. Without connectivity, we can't tap these resources. So in just 1 or 2 lines, you can set the context, because please keep in mind it's a small question just for 150 words, 10 marks. In just 1 or 2 lines, explain the significance of Central Asia and what is the biggest challenge we are facing in connecting with Central Asia. In the body, discuss the Connect Central Asia policy of India. You can bring out the key features of our Connect Central Asia policy by focusing on the competition which is underway in Central Asia. You can point out that many global and regional powers are also competing for influence. A great game is underway in Central Asia. You can point out that Central Asian republics can play an important role in stabilizing the region, especially with regard to the situation in Afghanistan. So that way you are explaining the regional global significance of Central Asian republics in geopolitics. Then you can go on to illustrate the initiatives between India and Central Asian republics. You can mention the 2015 visit of Prime Minister Modi to all the Central Asian countries. You can mention the first ever Central Asia summit, India Central Asia summit held in 2022. You can point out that there is focus on building security relations, countering terrorism. There is focus on building close economic ties, cultural relations. You can also mention that India Central Asia are working on some important connectivity projects and mention the names of those projects. Chabahar Port project, INSTC, Ashgabat Agreement, just 3-4 examples which can clearly point out that you are not only aware of the dynamics of India Central Asia relations, but you also know the initiatives which can be used to back up your answer. So if you're able to present this argument, then you can directly go to the conclusion and point out that India Central Asia relationship has a great future ahead. Because after the first summit in 2022, India's Central Asian republics have decided to make this a regular formal event. Every 2 years, India Central Asia Summit is going to take place. So this brings more structure and regular, consistent, high-level engagement into the relationship. So you can mention that India is working regularly and consistently with Central Asian countries, and the 2-year summit we have created, the biennial summit that we have set up, will go a long way in stepping up our political, economic and diplomatic relations. So in a crisp manner, you can end this answer while ensuring that all the key points are included. Let's look at question number 19 related to terrorism. Generally, this question should have been asked in GS paper 3 under internal security. And also, the focus of this question, the UNSC Counter-Terrorism Committee, was in the news in 2022. 2 years ago, India had hosted a summit of Counter-Terrorism Committee of UN Security Council, where the Delhi Declaration was adopted. So that is the reason why this question has been given. So again, it shows that there is a trend where UPSC might rely on older current affairs, maybe even from 2 years ago, to ask questions. So let's look at the question. Terrorism has become a significant threat to global peace and security. It's just a standalone statement regarding terrorism being a threat to global peace and security. Then the question, evaluate the effectiveness of UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee and its associated bodies in addressing and mitigating this threat at the international level. See, before you jump into writing your answer, just give it thought. Just spend maybe 20-30 seconds to analyze, comprehend the question and decide your approach. Generally, what students do is, they often skip or ignore the opening statement which has been given, which doesn't seem like a question. They directly jump into the actual question and talk about UNSC Counterterrorism Committee. But if you do that, you would be making a mistake. In any mains question, right, you need to do justice to every part of the question. In every question, there are few subparts. The question is mainly talking about terrorism being a global threat to peace and security. So ideally, your introduction should begin with this. You need to talk about the menace of terrorism, how it threatens peace, security and stability at the global level. Right? So maybe you can give some examples, right, from 9/11 attacks to 26/11 Mumbai attacks to the Uri and Pulwama attacks. So give a few examples of these terror attacks in India and around the world and just illustrate how terrorism poses a major threat to global peace and security. Maybe mention the rise of global terror groups like Islamic State, how it has threatened global peace and security. Maybe in 3 lines, you can provide this explanation regarding the rise of global terrorism over the last few decades, examples of few terror attacks and how global peace and stability has been affected. You can maybe even refer to the October 7th attack carried out by Hamas. Right? So even in that context, this question could have been asked on terrorism. So you can refer to the October 7th attack and how it pushed the region into a conflict. So that sets the answer, that sets the context for your answer. Now, before we jump into the body, let me show you that I had discussed the topic of counterterrorism at the United Nations level when we covered India-UN relations under the plus classes. We spoke about the role of UN in counterterrorism. We discussed the CCIT convention that India had proposed, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, mainly to target state-sponsored terrorism. We had spoken about 1267 Sanctions Committee, which can be brought in this answer. So let's see how exactly you can approach the answer writing for this particular question. So please be aware that the context in which the question has been asked is probably because in 2022, India hosted the summit and Delhi Declaration had been adopted, where India had pointed out the emerging threats in terrorism, like cryptocurrencies, the usage of drones by terrorist groups. So new emerging technologies being misused for terrorist purposes was the priority that India had promoted. So this is something you need to keep in mind before you start writing this answer. So what you can do is, as I said, in the introduction, set the context, maybe a few lines about terrorism being a global threat to peace and stability with some examples, and then you can introduce the UNSC Counter-Terrorism Committee in the body. A couple of lines about the Counter-Terrorism Committee. When was it set up? Who are the members? What is its mandate? It was established in 2001 following the 9/11 attacks. to counter global terrorism. It consists of all the 15 members of UN Security Council, the 5 permanent members, the P5, and the 10 non-permanent members. So in just one line, you are providing the basic facts about when the Counter-Terrorism Committee was set up, in what context, and who are the members. Then discuss the mandate. It's mainly focused on countering terrorist financing. It's focused on imposing sanctions on global terrorists. It has adopted several resolutions over the years to cripple the operations of terrorist groups. Essentially, it focuses on promoting cooperation between countries to track and arrest and extradite wanted terrorists. It focuses on limiting access to weapons for designated terrorists, along with placing financial sanctions and ensuring that global terrorism is countered through the United Nations. So these are some focus areas of the Counter-Terrorism Committee. So when you start the body of the answer, right, you can be a little elaborate here because this is a 250 word question for 15 marks. So now that you have introduced the answer by talking about global terrorism, in the body you have the freedom, the flexibility to talk about the Counter-Terrorism Committee and its primary mandate. Next, the focus has to be to discuss its effectiveness. How effective is Counter-Terrorism Committee of UNSC? This is where some analysis is required. You can point out that India hosted the summit in 2022 because back then India was a non-permanent member. We held the 8th non-permanent term at UNSC from 2021 to 2022. So as part of UN Security Council as a non-permanent member, India hosted the Counter-Terrorism Committee's meeting where we prioritized emerging technologies like cryptos and drones being misused for terrorist purposes, which was outlined in the Delhi Declaration. So you can mention this, showing that this is India's contribution. You can even make a reference to how India has used the 1267 Sanctions Committee to designate global terrorists, and then discuss whether these efforts of UNSC have been effective or not. The answer is essentially a mixed response between yes and no. In some areas, the Counter-Terrorism Committee has been effective when it comes to designating global terrorists, when it comes to bringing countries together, placing certain sanctions on them, on their right to movement, accessing weapons. In these cases, the Counter-Terrorism Committee has been slightly effective. But when it comes to imposing stringent sanctions, financial sanctions, freezing the assets of terrorists and terrorist groups, this committee has been affected by the politicization of UNSC. As you know, within UNSC, the power is wielded by the P5, the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council. So quite often, the functioning of UNSC and its Counter-Terrorism Committee is highly politicized, where the P5 members protect their own geopolitical interests. Especially China tends to shield Pakistan. Whenever India has tried to project Pakistan as the state sponsorer of terrorism, and we have tried using these platforms at UNSC to counter Pakistan and bring Pakistan under pressure, China has often shielded Pakistan, thereby politicizing this platform. In fact, there is an additional body attached to the Counter-Terrorism Committee, which is a executive directorate, which is meant to implement and enforce the decisions of the Counter-Terrorism Committee. The functioning of this additional body also has been crippled because of the constant tensions between China and United States and tensions between US and Russia. So the divisions within the P5 members, the politicization of the Security Council has affected the effectiveness of Counter-Terrorism Committee. So that should be your conclusion, right? So you can conclude by saying that the CTC has not been entirely effective, it's only been partially effective, but you can suggest a way forward. You can recommend that India's CCIT convention, which has been proposed, could be adopted to make the global fight against terrorism more effective. Through this convention, India has provided a universal definition of terrorism without distinction between good and bad terrorists. And also, the convention proposed by India mainly focuses on state-sponsored terrorism and the terrorist safe havens that exist. So you can bring this into the equation and suggest that India has already made a contribution. Maybe other countries should support India because we haven't got enough support to adopt this convention. So that could be a good way forward to end this answer. Coming to the last question from IR. this was pretty much anticipated. Given the tensions between India and Maldives over the last year, this question was very much anticipated. So the question reads, discuss the geopolitical and geostrategic importance of Maldives for India with a focus on global trade and energy flows. That is one part of your question. Further, also discuss how this relationship affects India's maritime security and regional stability amidst international competition. So the question is focused on the geopolitical, geostrategic significance of Maldives as far as India's trade and energy interests are concerned in the Indian Ocean. And the other part of the question focuses on the India-China competition, which is very much evident in Maldives. So the answer that you write should do justice to both parts of the question. So we had covered this topic comprehensively in our Conquer Mains session, in the first session of Conquer Mains, which you can see on our YouTube channel as well. I had discussed the entire history of India-Maldives relationship. I explained the location of Maldives in the Indian Ocean, how it occupies a strategic location right at the heart of the Indian Ocean, why Maldives is critical for global trade and energy supplies, because given its location in the Indian Ocean, it is very crucial for shipping. Key energy lanes and shipping lanes pass through this region, making the country, this island nation, very critical for India. And we also had discussed the political turmoil in Maldives and how it has affected India's ties with Maldives. How over the last decade, Chinese influence has grown and pro-China leaders have often adopted anti-India approach, promoting anti-India sentiments. We had discussed the boycott India campaign or the India out campaign, hashtag India out campaign, which was pushed by a few Maldivian leaders, which really posed a threat to Indian interests. Be it Yamin Gayoom, who was seen as a pro-China leader a few years ago, favoring China over India, cancelling key projects from India, right? Or be it the current leader who was elected last year, Mohammad Muizzu, who took a clear position against India, favored China, and even pushed the hashtag India out campaign. In fact, he won the elections primarily based on the hashtag India out campaign. After coming to power, he demanded that India remove all the troops and the military equipment that we had gifted to the country. So this did affect the relationship, and also the controversy surrounding Lakshadweep versus Maldives. When PM Modi visited Lakshadweep, there was an outrage in Maldives. Abusive language was used against PM Modi and India. This led to a social media outrage from India, leading to the boycott Maldives campaign, which significantly affected tourism revenue for Maldives. Tourist inflow from India was significantly hit. So it's in this context that the question has been asked. So let's see how you can build a good answer to this question. In the introduction, I would suggest that you talk about the geographical location of Maldives, because that will help you explain the geopolitical, geostrategic significance of Maldives. So maybe if possible, draw a rough map showing the brief or the rough location of Maldives in the Indian Ocean, and you can point out how it occupies the heart of the Indian Ocean. Right? You can even maybe show the trade routes linking West Asia, Africa with Southeast Asia, and how Maldives is situated right in the middle. So it plays a critical role as far as global trade and energy supplies are concerned. And this is crucial for India, because eventually India's prospects, economic and security prospects they are tied to stability in the Indian Ocean. You can even mention the Sagar Doctrine of India, under which the Modi government has prioritized security and growth for all countries in the region, and how India aims to emerge as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. So this way you are clearly establishing the geopolitical, geostrategic significance of Maldives and how it is crucial for us for global trade, for maritime security. Then in the body you can start discussing the traditionally good relations between India and Maldives. Maybe just one line about the historically good relations where India has always stood with Maldives, helped Maldives. Be it a security crisis or economic crisis, India has always stood with the country. But of late, especially after 2011, there have been adverse developments where we have seen the rise of anti-India leaders. And you can even take the names as well. You can mention former President Yamin Gayoom, who came to power in 2012 and had a very complex relationship with India until 2018. You can point out how Yamin Gayoom favored China. We saw the rise of Chinese influence. how Maldives joined the Belt and Road Initiative, how Maldives leased an entire island, the Fedu Finolu Island, to China for infrastructure projects which could potentially have military implications. You can mention the free trade agreement China-Maldives signed. So just by mentioning these specific incidents, you can show the rising influence of China and the closeness that Maldives developed under leaders like Yamin Gayoom and how Indian interests were compromised. Then you can draw a parallel with the recent developments from last year. How the election of Mohammad Moizu, who came to power based on his anti-India campaign, the hashtag India Out campaign, has again led to the emergence of similar threats, where Mohammad Moizu insisted that Indian troops should be removed, Indian military equipment should also be withdrawn, and how he visited China before visiting India, clearly signaling an anti-India approach, a pro-China approach. So present this as the competition that India is facing, how this could even be a threat to our maritime security. Right? You can even talk about the rising influence of Pakistan and the growing presence of radical groups in Maldives. Over the last decade, we have seen the rise of radical outfits with increasing support for terrorist groups as well, like Islamic State, which does pose a threat to India's security interests, especially maritime security interests. So once you bring out all these challenges and concerns that India faces in the region, right? So that would basically complete the answer, and you can bring out the conclusion. In the conclusion, you can state that despite all these problems, India still has retained its influence because India is an indispensable partner. Maldives is dependent on India. And even Mohammad Moizu, who had initially taken an anti-India position, has now started moderating his position towards India. Because Maldives is facing an economic crisis, you can mention that. Maldives is facing a debt crisis and it relies on India for financial support, liquidity support to stabilize its economy. And the flow of Indian tourists is critical for the Maldivian economy. So a couple of points based on this, how India is indispensable to Maldives. And this shows that India can protect its interests despite the competition that we are facing here from rivals like China. And that essentially completes your answer. So this was my discussion of the 4 IR questions from GS paper 2. I hope you guys have liked the session. If you did feel it was a good session, a good discussion, do support us with your likes, your comments, and do subscribe to our channel. Now, we will hand over the session to Aastha ma'am, who shall be discussing the questions from social justice. So just wait for a minute or two. We will transition and Aastha ma'am will be taking up the next part of the discussion. Thanks for watching. All the best.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back for the continued analysis of GS2 paper, which was held today. We'll be taking up the section of social justice. But before that, let me check with the back end if I'm clearly audible and visible to you all. Just allow me 10 odd seconds. All right, we have a confirmation. Let's begin now. All right, so we are here to discuss the section on social justice. Now, social justice had about 4 questions which came in. Now, let's discuss the questions first in general, and then we'll dive into the detailed discussion. So 4 questions almost amounting to 50 marks. The first question was on the aspect or under the social sector's syllabus topic that is given in GS2 called education. Within education, because of the recent updates related to the NEET exam, the NTA exam, so on and so forth. Therefore, there was a question on the same. Now, we had done education when it comes to the issues plaguing the higher education sector and few issues plaguing the examinations per se for entrances in our QEPs. Of course, because there was an act around it, the Unfair Means Act, therefore it also becomes a topic for governance, and which was done by Sir, so that could have been discussed well. So we are done with this topic or this question which was associated with the Unfair Means Act and what are the issues in general with the higher education sector per se. But this could have been taken as one question belonging to social justice. Now, the second question associated with it is a question on public health care system. We will try and understand why was this question very expected, and we've covered this in our QEPs. The third question is on the role of civil society. Without writing civil society per se, they have given a specific term which becomes public charitable trusts. But in general, even if you had prepared a note on the role of civil society in development process, that question could have been somewhat answered. Okay, so this was on public charitable organizations or trusts. Under the bigger question or topic that becomes civil society organization, the third sector as we call it. The fourth question that we had in today's paper was on poverty and malnutrition. This was not a very different question. In fact, they have earlier in their previous year questions have also asked a question associated with poverty and hunger, the topic exactly given in the syllabus. Now, let's dive into our first analysis with the question which will fetch 15 marks, that is related to health. So all these four questions amounted to about 50 marks for GS paper 2. Now, there's also one little comment or trend analysis that I want to specifically talk about, which is a lot of questions which were earlier coming in GS paper 2 or were associated with the syllabus topics of GS paper 2 today have actually been asked in GS paper 1, because there is a sort of a seamless connect between society and social issues in paper 1 and the social justice section in paper 2. For example, women's empowerment as a topic is also in paper 1, and issues relating to vulnerable sections under which women would also come is a topic of paper 2. So when these two are combined together, this should be your mode of preparation even for the times to come. So this kind of an analysis when it comes to same kind of questions being asked in two papers, because two syllabus topics associated with that one subject are both in the two topics, in the two papers. So that is what we will dive into right now with the first question. Poverty and malnutrition create a vicious cycle, adversely affecting social capital formation. What steps can be taken to break the cycle? Now, this is a question. Please understand, this is just a 10-marker question. So, it will be, now you will have a lot of things to write for malnutrition. You would separately have a lot of data points and pointers to write for poverty, as well as the third keyword that is mentioned, that is human capital formation. The idea is to make sure that you are not answering, since you do not have a lot of space in a 10-marker question. Therefore, the idea is to answer the question and try to not deal with these particular keywords in isolation. As much as possible, you have to, after the introduction, start connecting these keywords and explaining how they are a cause and effect of each other. Okay, so in fact, we were lucky enough to get this directly. This is a document or diagram that I had made in our QEP sessions, tracing the trajectory from nutrition, malnutrition, and in fact talking about malnutrition leading to intergenerational poverty, not just poverty but intergenerational poverty, and therefore treating the topic of malnutrition amongst not just children but even women, that we often forget. Otherwise, generally, when we speak about malnutrition, we always think about children. But that is not the case. Malnutrition mothers, in fact, lead to an intergenerational vicious cycle of producing malnourished or undernourished children. So that is one proper flowchart that we had discussed, along with the matching keywords, that is the human capital formation. Now, three things to this. First, when we talk about poverty, you could talk about why did this question particularly come. This particular question came because there was a lot of discussion around poverty because of the recently conducted or the recently published household consumption expenditure survey, which had particularly remarked that the poverty in India has come down to about 5%. So that could be mainly your introductory data, or your introductory data could also be about the multidimensional poverty index. A little data about malnutrition could have been very stark statement, very statements which are extremely, you don't have to remember ranks if you cannot, but just a statement stating that 50% of all the children who are suffering from the problem of wasting are residing in India. So this is a statement which is very telling. This is a statement which is in a way indicating the massive problem of undernutrition or malnutrition that we are facing. Okay, so this kind could be okay. Also, another data point which we could have used is about not just undernutrition in children, but you could say 50% of Indian females suffer from the problem of anemia, which becomes even worse at the time of childbirth, leading to a lot of complications. So all these data points are enough for you to, in a way, begin your answer. Now, it was important to get into the vicious cycle. A very good way of depicting a vicious cycle becomes a cause and effect cycle, is to basically show a diagram. Now, even if you're writing the pointers in your answers in a bullet format, just a small diagram on the side could make your answer a lot more appealing. It could add those little enrichment related pointers. Please look at what do you mean by vicious cycle. Vicious cycle means continuing. So you have to talk about how poverty and malnutrition are affecting human capital formation. Okay, so in this context, you will talk about three things. Okay, one, you will talk about human capital formation here and how this is particularly affected. For this, you must know what is human capital formation. When we study this, we always talk about human development or human being in a country becoming a resource for that country. When does a particular human being become a resource? When they are educated, when they are a healthy workforce, and when they are particularly skilled. So these are the sections mentioned in your syllabus as well as social sectors, which are in fact agents of ensuring that human capital formation is done. So that is human capital formation, that you are changing your humans into a human resource. You are making them more healthy, you are making them more skilled, and you are making them educated in order to live a decent and healthy life, and of course contribute to the growth of the nation. So in this context, we will talk about, in this context, we will have poverty here and we will have malnutrition here. How are they creating a vicious cycle? Poverty leads to a problem of affordability of not being able to afford proper or sufficient quality nutrition for their child or for their family, leading to a lot of issues of insufficient calorie intake, leading to also the inability of diversifying your food diets particularly. So poverty is leading to a problem of affordability, and this affordability leads to lesser calorie intake, insufficient food, lack of food security, as well as a problem of diversification of diets, because we would often understand that other important components of a healthy diet, for example proteins, for example healthy fats, etc., are not generally included in a diet which has to be afforded in very low income. Generally, the focus is only to provide basic carbs and not just a diversified diets, ensuring that the micronutrient deficiency does not remain. So all these issues when it comes to poverty, inability to supply for basic human needs such as food, lead to a lot of issues such as malnutrition. What do you mean by malnutrition? You are undernourished. The amount of calories or the kind of diversification that your body needs for proper growth and development, it has not been provided that with. So here you can give examples, and with malnutrition you can particularly say, why does it automatically leads to a substandard capital formation, which again leads to poverty? Because a malnourished child is going to be will have lesser chances of having the same amount of cognitive development that a child which is properly nutrition, which is given proper diet, and therefore he can absorb any kind of educational inputs per se. So malnutrition leads to a barrier or restricts the cognitive development in individuals. Malnutrition also increases the chances of individuals to in a way acquire diseases, which further leads to a lot of out-of-pocket expenditure, furthering the person back into the cycle of poverty. So high incidence of diseases, unproductive, a malnutritioned child will be less equipped at absorbing educational outcomes, and therefore will become an unproductive or not a healthy workforce. This again leads to lack of economic opportunities. An unhealthy individual, an individual with less cognitive development, will generally be associated with the informal workforce. That will again perpetuate the poverty cycle. So that is the vicious cycle related to it. You can talk about how poverty is also relating to human capital or underdevelopment of human capital formation, in which you can say poverty restricts good educational attainment, which further will restrict good employment opportunities. Further, the continuation in unorganized informal sectors, manual labor, so on and so forth, restrict the opportunities of skilling, and therefore again adversely affecting or impacting human capital formation. So that is the interconnected cycle or approach that you would particularly say. Okay. Now, when you talk about poverty, Ellie, the second part of it is what steps can be taken to break this particular cycle. Now, there will be steps both for poverty as well as for malnutrition. Those steps, and one of the most popular initiatives in today's time, are the models of self-help groups, which have proved very good or which have performed very well when it comes to the domain of poverty alleviation. So you can talk about the model of self-help groups, that is empowering communities to come together, enhance their capacity to in a way receive small income loans, and therefore start an enterprise and get empowered themselves. So self-help groups are a very important initiative when it comes to poverty alleviation. In fact, a lot of government schemes now, such as the PM EGP etc. programs, are now delivered using the model of SHG because of its popularity and because of its success in alleviating poverty. Again, with this, a very important point, because you are talking about malnutrition, because you are talking about poverty and breaking that cycle, and ensuring that the future workforce, the human capital formed in the future, is particularly productive, you must focus, and that those will one of those will be your suggestions, that you must focus on women empowerment. In fact, in one of these lectures, we had spoken about the intergenerational aspect, that for malnutrition, to counter malnutrition as well as intergenerational poverty, you must empower women. An educated woman, or a woman earning their own livelihood particularly, or having their own savings, according to reports and trends, are more likely to invest in expenditure relating to the health, nutrition and education of the children. Women related health and empowerment is the key for breaking, and this is what you will write in the suggestions, that this is the key for breaking an intergenerational cycle of malnutrition and poverty. What do you mean by an intergenerational cycle? Malnutritioned mothers will in a way produce weaker children, weak in terms of immunity, weak in terms of nutrition needs, leading to lesser cognitive development, leading to lesser educational attainment, and therefore further leading to unproductive or substandard quality of human capital that is produced. So women's health and empowerment will become your key strategy when it comes to this section, okay? And therefore a lot of initiatives, and you'll talk about the government initiatives, a lot of initiatives are particularly targeted for in fact the ICDS schemes. The ICDS schemes are particularly targeted for pregnant and lactating women, as well as children in the pre-primary stage, where a lot of nutrition related support, iron and folic acid tablets etc. are particularly provided. Of course, livelihood related opportunities will help in breaking the cycles of poverty as well. So livelihood related programs, for example MG Narega, can be a part of it. Dedicated government programs, for example the Poshan Abhiyan, with proper targets in order to curtail or reduce the rate of wasting, stunting, anemia, so on and so forth, becomes a ready step or a suggestion. The next examples could be the schemes such as midday meals, yes, which in a way provide for, which are countering two problems. One is education and one is hunger per se in government primary schools. And of course the PDS program in order to counter hunger. PDS means that even if you are not being able to afford food grains, if you come from the most underprivileged sections of the society, and affordability is a problem when it comes to the basic rights such as right to food, it will be provided at a subsidized rate and also free at times. And therefore the Garib Kalyan Yojana has been extended again and again. So PDS system is also an initiative of the same. Other aspects can also be immunization. Please understand, immunization, preventing children from diseases, can also help in curbing malnutrition related criteria. Yes, another, now please understand, most of us will write this, but these are generally aspects which have been taken by the government. When they are asking what steps can be taken, other than writing what has already been done, please also dive into a few innovative suggestions of what also can be done. For example, in order to enhance or in order to ensure the hidden hunger is also a big problem in today's time. So in order to ensure those deficiencies are particularly catered to, food fortification can be a very good suggestion. So just a few suggestions. I'm not saying dive too much into it, but just 2-3 suggestions also, other than what the government is particularly already doing in terms of big schemes and programs. So food fortification becomes an example. Again, the other example or the other step can be increasing the social security net. The social security net when it comes to pensions, when it comes to employment benefits, etc., can help both the increase in savings and income, or have a certain kind of a hedging of the risks, as well as provide for certain kind of security to cater to malnutrition. So these become a few other options or suggestions in order to break that cycle. Okay, so that was the aspect associated with it. And for conclusion, you can always talk about, because human capital formation is written in the statement, you can always talk about it with connecting it to the demographic dividend. You can always say that India has a substantial portion of their population in the working age group, and therefore it is very important for India to dedicatedly target these segments or these barriers which are inhibiting the formation of productive human resource that is absolutely needed for reaping the demographic dividend. So that can be a conclusion attaching it to that importance. Yes? Now, the next question, again very important, 15 marks. Let me tell you why this was on the expected lines, extremely on the expected lines, because, and which is why we had done this in the form of universal healthcare here, and we had also done the second part of the question. Let's discuss this first. When we analyzed the trends, we noticed that there was no question on health in the year 2023. There was no question in the year 2023 on the topic of health, which is a subtopic under the social sectors mentioned in GS paper 2. Also, India's scheme, particularly called the Jan Arogya Yojana or the Ayushman Bharat mission, is celebrated as being the world's biggest publicly funded health insurance scheme. That is a publicly funded health insurance, the largest and the biggest. And that scheme, PM Jan Arogya Yojana or Ayushman Bharat, was completing 5 years in 2023. When it was not asked in 2023, when health as a topic was skipped, there was a high chance of health as a topic, and especially in the context of universal health, that means health for all, being provided not just on reliance on the private sector, but the government making it as almost a matter of right that health should be affordable, accessible and available for all sections irrespective of their earning capacity or affordability per se. Yes, so that was universal health coverage asked in the previous year questions, but a few years ago, and because of the publicly funded scheme, that is Ayushman Bharat, the theme again was recurrent. The theme was also, a lot of editorials were also asked on this particular, were written on this particular topic. Now, the first aspect of this, how do you introduce this? You can talk about a little bit of healthcare related data. For example, you can talk about the SDG 3 or the Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is talking about ensuring health and universal health for all at all times. So SDG 3 could have been an introduction. You can also introduce or given the definition of universal health, that anyone should always be able to access healthcare irrespective of their earning capacity, and therefore health should now be treated more as a matter of right, and therefore that could be your introduction. Or you could talk about why healthcare intervention by the government, by the public, what do you mean by public healthcare, is absolutely important. So in that context, maybe you could go give some data. Simple, not very complicated data, but simple data suggesting that India has the highest TB burden in terms of the maximum cases in the world related to tuberculosis happen in India. So you could have spoken about that, suggesting that there is a very important need for public healthcare to be focused on. Okay. Now, with this, if you align this question with universal healthcare is basically on 3 parameters. Universal healthcare. Universal means it should be available to all without any barriers, without any preconditions of earning capacity, affording capacity, wherever you are particularly residing. So there should not be a problem of affordability, there should not be a problem of accessibility, and there should not be a problem of availability. So those are the 3 parameters on which universal healthcare is provided. Now when you see this particular figure and what the statement the question makes, in the crucial domain, that means public healthcare is a very crucial domain. Health is almost considered as it's not purely recognized, but it's almost considered as as an important right to life. And therefore healthcare related interventions or demand should always be answered not just on the basis of affordability. So that kind of a welfare related sector being healthcare, which has to be invested, or which from this sector, the basic agenda is that from this sector so important like healthcare and education, the government cannot particularly remove themselves. The government cannot turn a blind eye, because these are necessity. These social sectors will influence how your human capital will be formed in the future. So the government can maybe escape or leave certain sections, certain sectors of the economy which are provided, in which the services are provided very easily by the market forces, by the private sector. But in domains like education and health, which are extremely important for the development, for human development per se, there the obligation on the government still remains, because you call yourself a welfareist state as well. You cannot turn a blind eye to healthcare related interventions or problems. Yes. So therefore the first topic, let's understand the first part of it. In a crucial domain like public healthcare system, why crucial we have discussed, because it's one of the social sectors. It will determine human development for the future. It is a sector for which the government should be obligated to provide welfare related schemes, because it is affecting normal human life. Okay, so in a crucial domain like public healthcare, you've understood, you've answered in one line why crucial. India, the Indian state. Now here the Indian state does not mean the states in India, they mean state to be the government of India. Okay, the Indian state should play a vital role to contain the adverse impact of marketization of the system. So our first aspect becomes, what are the adverse? Please understand the first, because it's a 15-marker question, you have to address the first part of the question as well. That means you will have to make a comment on what are the possible adverse effects that are plaguing the healthcare sector because of private sector participation or marketization. Clear? So that becomes the first point. It can be answered very easily using this diagram. Does market or the intervention of private sector, private healthcare, does it ensure affordability per se? Can it remove the problem of affordability when it comes to achieving universal healthcare? The answer is no. The private sector will definitely work on a profit-driven motive, and therefore affordability becomes an issue. Those sections of the population that are downtrodden, that are coming from economically weaker strata, they will not be able to afford proper healthcare services. Is it available everywhere? market for or private sector hospitals? The answer is no. The private sector hospitals will be concentrated in urban areas where the demand of the amenities are high, where the charges could have been more. They will not be present. In fact, there is a huge dearth of healthcare professionals as well as institutions in the rural areas. There's a huge amount of rural and urban disparity when it comes to healthcare. Yes, and therefore the problem of accessibility also, the unavailability of healthcare professionals or specialty hospitals, that means the tertiary healthcare segments in rural areas. A rural area might have a district hospital which is also very far off, creating a problem of accessibility. So these are not catered to by the market forces by leaving healthcare just to the market forces. Just a few bullet points on what are the problems associated with the private sector involvement in the healthcare, and therefore you can say the rural urban disparity. The second issue that you can particularly talk about is the affordability problem, driven by profit motive, and therefore a huge section of a developing country like India will not be able to afford or avail healthcare services in the private sector, and therefore leading to an exclusion of a lot of people from the lower economic strata. The next part of it is the denial of basic right to health. Okay, the next aspect is also extremely or skewed emphasis on tertiary care. Most of the healthcare sectors, most of the private healthcare sectors are dealing with particularly specialized healthcare, big hospitals which are in a way associated with urban areas. So tertiary healthcare, okay, tertiary healthcare is particularly focused, not other areas of healthcare. For example, the ignorance of primary healthcare. Why is primary healthcare important? Primary healthcare is particularly important because this is the first touch point for any individual to avail healthcare services. Primary healthcare centers should be in a way developed or equipped enough to at least handle basic healthcare related problems. And primary healthcare, community outreach, etc. are in fact very important and prominent in ensuring that curative or for example, only healthcare related to after a disease has happened is not the norm. Primary healthcare also ensure preventive healthcare and promotional healthcare is the norm, and that is also focused upon by providing early diagnostics, by providing certain community related outreach services or awareness campaigns, thereby reducing the burden for extra referrals and specialty care. So skewed emphasis only in the tertiary sector, ignorance of the primary sector, which we have also said is important for preventive healthcare. To reduce the burden for curative healthcare, we must also now start focusing on preventive healthcare. The other aspects of or issues relating to marketization are relating to the certain unethical practices such as non-essential procedures, which maybe were not required, but those surgeries were conducted. Right? The lack of uniformity when it comes to the standard operating procedures, the very expensive devices, for example, overly priced stents that are used for a basic cardiovascular procedure. Yes, so those are non-essential procedures, as well as the prevalence of unethical practices that we particularly hear of, which is why the government cannot turn a blind eye. Okay, the last is the lack of uniformity in procedures. that we have spoken about. So because of this, now you can say, which is why it is crucial for the government or for the state to continue focusing on an aspect such as healthcare. Because private sector interaction or intervention can help in the healthcare sector, but you cannot. India right now is not in a stage where it can completely rely on the market forces in a sector as important as healthcare because of these regions. So with that connecting point, you will move to the second part of the question, which is asking, suggest some measures through which the state can enhance the reach of public healthcare at the grassroots level. Okay, so here we've already done also the steps taken. So with that, we will talk about, first and foremost, one of the biggest criticisms for the government or for most countries is that they do not they do not spend on healthcare as much as it is required. So the expenditure or the fund that is allocated for the healthcare budget is limited. The National Health Policy wants this expenditure to, in a way, increase and at least reach 2.5% of the GDP by 2025. This is what the National Health Policy of 27 has recommended. So the first part of this becomes that yes, we have to increase the budgetary allocation for a sector as important as healthcare. The second suggestion could particularly be that we need to, because please look at this keyword in the question. It says grassroots level. Grassroots level, if it's written grassroots level in the question, and then you do not dedicatedly talk about private healthcare, that means the healthcare establishment that is closest to the community to reach, not secondary district hospitals, not tertiary super specialty hospitals, then the problem related to a disease just arises. They will first go to a primary healthcare center. And we had discussed how primary healthcare also leads to a lot of preventive and promotional healthcare activities. So primary healthcare centers have to be promoted. And that is why what we had envisioned under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana is also to modernize, equip with all diagnostics, testing methods, etc. So modernize and equip all these primary health and centers into dedicated health and wellness centers. So that is also one approach that you can talk about. The other aspect that you will also talk about is that the government particularly must also, if you have to reach the grassroots, if you want to reach that one lactating woman in a remote district per se, the primary healthcare center will not go to her, will not ensure that even a person on in the last person in the queue is targeted. But community workers, community social workers will ensure that the whole community or the whole villages, districts, etc. are covered by going door to door. And therefore we have the ASHA workers per se that are doing a phenomenal job when it comes to, in fact, which is why a lot of awareness now around institutional delivery has led to a reduction in our maternal mortality ratio, which is dipped below 100 now. So that is something that you can talk about it, that community healthcare workers, the engagement of community healthcare workers is absolutely necessary for ensuring the last mile connectivity or in ensuring preventive healthcare. Specifically, you can give the example of the success relating to maternal health due to the efforts of the ASHA workers. That is an example. Another step that you can possibly suggest is that the government can particularly cover a huge section of the population in some kind of health insurance, because any kind of health related expenditure sometimes, and that was a criticism till very late, and it's still a problem that we face, that an Indian spends a lot when it comes to healthcare from their pockets, a term that we call as out of pocket expenditure. This has of course reduced. It has come down till about 47, which was more than 60 at one point, courtesy the government establishing or publishing, in a way starting a program called the Ayushman Bharat scheme. That means a publicly funded health insurance schemes providing for certain kind of health insurance up to about 5 lakhs that can be availed, and therefore reducing the amount of expenditure incurred by an individual for availing healthcare. Yes, so the publicly funded or interventions relating to increasing health insurance penetration. The example you can give the success story of Ayushman Bharat, which has significantly led to a reduction in out-of-pocket expenditure. The terms that are used generally in the newspapers are terms that will also fetch you more marks. So make sure that you are using these terms. Another aspect of reaching the grassroots without physically reaching the grassroots is using the aspect of telemedicine. Telemedicine, that is the e-Sanjeevani portal. The e-Sanjeevani portal particularly, that helps in connecting a lot of remote locations with the consultation relating to specialists as well. So telemedicine becomes a solution in that context. Another solution is that the government particularly has the Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, which basically is talking about the increase in tertiary care hospitals. For example, aims like super speciality hospitals, public hospitals, even in other remote regions. The idea is to increase their presence in remote areas or in other regions in order to remove or reduce the regional disparity that we witness today. Yes, so Swasthya Suraksha, PM Swasthya Suraksha Yojana for building or increasing tertiary care in other areas also becomes an option. The seventh example can be that you can create a sort of incentives. The problem that we face when it comes to the lack of professionals in the rural areas. So a kind of incentive can be particularly created for professionals, healthcare professionals which are particularly graduating from institutions. Certain kind of tax benefits, additional incentives, etc. can be provided. Certain quota, in fact, also can be mandated for them to work a certain amount of years in rural areas in order to check, in order to get the numbers according to what the WHO has mandated for the number of, or for the ratio, that is the doctors to population ratio. So certain kind of incentives, certain kind of quotas for government seats particularly, or certain kind of other incentives can also work in solving the problem of availability of professionals. Yes, so that is a part of it. Eighth, last but not the least, you can talk about ensuring that the best practices such as the Delhi government's Mohalla clinics particularly are also replicated in other regions which have become a success story. So these are aspects that you can particularly talk about. Yes. Now let's move on to our next question. When it comes to conclusion, you can talk about why, again the same, you can use an SDG, or you can talk about how healthcare becomes or will still remain an obligation on the government. Now last, this question, Public charitable trusts have the potential to make India's development more inclusive as they relate to certain vital public issues. Comment. Now, I understand most of you would not dedicatedly go and do a note only on public charitable trusts, but even if, and that is what I had particularly done, even if you do the role played by civil society organization, because they are in fact a subset of the broader term that is civil society organization, you can cater to the demand of this question. Clear? So when you talk about general aspects or role played by civil society for development. Now, the introduction can be talking about the need for more hands for a developing country like India, where the resources are limited for the government and therefore the expenditure on welfare related activities can only be limited, and therefore the voluntary participation of the civil society is a must for a country like India, which is still in its developing stage. So more the number of hands contributing to development, the better it is. So that is how you can introduce by giving a general statement on the importance of the civil society organization. Okay? And then you can go on to talking about what are the general features, how can they help in the development in or make development more inclusive in India. So for that you can talk about that the government is in fact ensuring that they use the help, and you can give in this, you can also give the help of I understand. Now, it's easy for us to sit here and give you examples, but I understand that sometimes you are limited in terms of giving examples for public charitable trusts. So, in that case, you can also talk about a few NGOs per se, which are particularly working in specific fields for the development of certain sections. Even that will not be a major problem when it comes to this exam, this particular question. So, in this case, you can say the government particularly uses these particular trusts in order for collaboration. It collaborates with them because these are reaching the last mile. They are helping the vulnerable sections sometimes, which is also the responsibility of the government, but they can in a way outsource that responsibility. So the government collaborates with them in order to ensuring that development is reaching the last mile. Therefore, it is ensuring by reaching the last mile means no remote location. Inclusive development would mean development for all. The benefits for growth in the nation or the development of India must be reaped by all sections. There should be no sections that are left behind in the development strategy. Okay, so when you're talking about the government collaborating with them, outsourcing some of their functions to them, you can talk about that. You can also say that for normal individuals, they become in fact a measure or in a way an outlet for charity. So a person, if he or she has to in a way engage in charity or philanthropy, those kind of efforts, they generally do it with the help of trusts. They generally do it with the help of NGOs because they are more legitimate, they are more recognized, and they will have their means to in a way ensure that that money for charity is used in a specific manner. Okay, so it becomes an aid, an outlet for aid or charity per se. It also is very important because a lot of public charitable trusts can also act as advocates for the rights of certain sections. Okay, so they can also take up advocacy and help in policy implementation and give their inputs while policies are formulated. Certain examples in the domain of healthcare, inclusive development would also include healthcare. That means health related developments. So in the domain of healthcare, you can give the example of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation engaging in a lot of efforts for ensuring that immunization, vaccination related services are provided for the most underprivileged sections of the society, ensuring human development is not stopped in the global south as well. So in healthcare, you can talk about Bill and Melinda Gates. in vulnerable sections. For example, how does it ensure that development is inclusive? It also ensures by certain organizations or trusts are working for the upliftment of the vulnerable sections and therefore ensuring social justice. That means they are also doing the job that the government is intending to. For example, the Kailash Satyarthi Foundation, a very famous foundation, the Kailash Satyarthi Foundation, is a big advocate and in fact working for eliminating the problem of child labor and working in the field of child rights. So they are in a way engaged in a lot of rehabilitating child labor and therefore in a way upholding child rights. So this is something that you can talk about. How does it make education better? If you would have heard of the Azim Premji University, they are ensuring that education is also going till the most remotest areas and the most underprivileged sections are also being able to avail education services. So that is also that you can give as example. Environment related trusts and charitable trusts or organizations are also a part. For example, you can also talk about the global NGOs, for example the WWF etc. or Fridays for the Future etc. that are specifically saying that the development should not just be development that is in a way leading to an adverse effect on the environment, but development which is more sustainable, and that sustainable development will be inclusive. Inclusive for whom? For the generations of the future. So environment related NGOs, environment related civil society organizations is also something that you can talk about. Talking of conservation, talking of maybe WWF, so on and so forth. Yes, other organizations also helping. For example, there is an organization, a charitable trust, etc., such as Goonj, which is very, very prominent. In fact, they are helping in times of disaster, in times of development aid, humanitarian aid, so on and so forth. Yes, so this helps us in building back better is something that you can also talk about. Okay, so these will be enough for a 10-marker question. Just basics about what is the role that the civil society organizations play. They help the government for ensuring last mile connectivity. They are an outlet for people who want to take up charitable activities, philanthropic activities. They are also advocate of the rights of the people and therefore are also adding to the efforts of the government in a developing country like India, where the resources in the government's hands are limited. That is something that you can talk about. Yes, and last but not the least, you can again give a same thing about the civil society as a bigger topic, and you can say that it is considered, it's rightly considered the third sector and a very important sector, because where private sector will only function with a profit driven working motive, and the government will in a way have its limitations, that's where the non-profit sector will, or the non-governmental sector will step in. Okay, so with this we've come to an end for today's session. I hope you I wish you the best for tomorrow's exams. Thank you so much for all the time. If you have liked our initiatives, please make sure that you like, comment and subscribe. We are coming up with a lot more content in the future, but your love is absolutely required in these small gestures. Thank you so much. Good night everyone. Bye bye.